Okay, so again, one of the main reasons why I'm making these videos is because my mom and dad won't see me or talk to me. And I'm giving kind of the background and context to how this all occurred. So as I mentioned, in high school, the shoot-away machine did mess up my shot. And my dad always helped me with my shot. He always told me to shoot sideways. But he didn't realize the reason why I shot well was because how I moved into shots. And that made me shoot sideways. So when I had the shooting machine, I'm picking the ball off the rack and I'm artificially shooting sideways, but I wasn't moving into the shots correctly. And shooting is all about how you move into shots. Now, my dad probably thought it was because I was shooting overhead that my shot got messed up, but no. Me shooting on the shooting machine coincided with me starting to shoot overhead. And if I was shooting just regular with passes and just naturally, I would have stayed shooting automatically. I was always unconscious. I would have I just would have conformed to what was perfect because I didn't think. But because I was picking the ball off the rack, I was doing it incorrectly. And I could show in detail exactly what I'm talking about. How, especially when I was picking the ball off the right side of the rack, I would shoot with my left foot in front of my right, shoot square, just because that's how I was moving into the shot. Whereas if I was picking the ball off the left side, I would step right foot, left foot, and I would shoot good. That was the only shot I would be able to shoot well. But that was because of how I was picking the ball off of the rack. And I can go into extreme details about all of it, but I don't want to make good shooters think. So I'm not going to do that. But my mom and dad want to believe that there was something wrong with me, and that's not the case. Now, in college, I didn't mention this at all. I never brought up the shoot-away machine, although I noticed it my sophomore year. But as I said, my grandpa had come up with a rule in high school. He would say, no talking about the past. And that was just because at that time, I was saying to my dad, because I needed help with my shot, I'd be like, Dad, when I was the best, you would shoot with me. But then when I stopped being the best, then you gave up on me. And my grandpa would be like, no, Ryan, no talk about the past. Because, if you're in the flow, you're just completely in the eternal moment. So, he came up with that rule. So in college, I never brought up anything about the shoot-away machine because I knew I was not allowed to talk about the past. And as I mentioned, my mom had developed a kind of a contempt for me and hatred for me during that high school time, especially and even during middle school when my dad and I were having the problems with my shot. And she thought, what is wrong with you? She thought there was something wrong with me. And so I'll just give some examples of what my grandpa was teaching me during college based around all this stuff. So for instance, as I said, I wanted to get a computer. My sister had a really good computer. I had a bad computer. And I asked my mom, can I get a computer? And my mom said, why would we want to get you anything? You're just a burden for our family. She hated me. And I said, well, why does Leah have a good computer? She said, because we like Leah. We don't like you. So there was already a hatred developed for me. Now, at that time, I still had the swag flow. I lost the swag flow my sophomore year of college, but when I looked at the videos, I'll get to that later. But my mom developed a kind of a contempt for me at that time. And so, but my grandpa's big thing was, he was like, well, if your mom doesn't want to get you a computer, Ryan, the key to that is you have to become independent. And once you become independent, and that was his thing in high school too. He thought that really what I wanted was independence. And so long as you're independent, everything's going to be fine, because he said, if you're not independent, if you're dependent, you have ally enemy software, where the people who do things for you, they're your allies. If they don't, they're your enemies. And the remedy to that is to become independent. And, ally enemy software is very self-confirmatory, and it's even impersonal, because it's action-oriented, where you want to fight the people who don't do what you wanted them to do. So he was saying, the only cure for that is to become independent. But again, he didn't realize. Now, my mom would listen to that, and she would think, okay, yeah, independent. Yeah, keep him away from me. I don't want anything to do with him. And it just made her even more emotionally cold and distant. And the same thing with my dad. So he's listening to this. He's like, yeah, well, I want him to be independent. I don't want anything to do with him. And mom's like, yeah, I don't want anything to do with him. I hate him. I want him to be independent. And what I wanted was the complete opposite. I didn't want independence. I wanted them to, I wanted them to be able to listen to me, for them to not be emotionally distant, for them to be there for me, listen to me and stuff like that. But at that time, I hadn't told them about the shoot-away machine. But my point, though, is this is creating a recipe for disaster. my grandpa's ideas. So my grandpa thinks he's helping. Oh, really what you want, Ryan, is independence. And once you're independent, everything's going to be fine. So you just need to get a job and you need to become independent and then you can get your own computer. But sure, yeah, that's true. Having my own, being able to get my own computer would be helpful. But at the same time, what would also be helpful is for you to not, as he said, he cast pearls of swine. And my mom and dad misinterpreted all this. So they're like, oh yeah, independent. Yeah, we don't want anything to do with them. But at that time, my mom and dad were still a part of my life. And as I said, after I quit basketball too, they were coming, they were starting to become happier with me. And they would, they seemed to not be so upset because I wasn't asking my dad for help with my shot because I didn't need help anymore. And then in college, after I looked at the videos, I realized it was a shooting machine. I kind of gave up on asking my dad for help. I didn't need his help. I realized what happened. It was a shooting machine that was a problem. But after I showed them the Quadra model, they didn't believe that. And they thought that I had something wrong with me. They thought that I was schizophrenic. And as I said, my mom said, oh, so that's why your shot got messed up when you were younger, because you started to become mentally ill. That's not the case. It was the shoot-away machine. If it wasn't for the shoot-away machine, none of that would have happened. So, and I really did discover the theory of everything. It really is a huge theory. And my mom doesn't believe that. They don't believe that. But, so this is some other things that my grandpa was teaching me at this time. So, some other things was, as I said, he's an existential metapsychiatrist. I only really started to understand this in 2020, what existentialism is. Existentialists, they believe it's important to just take responsibility. Don't blame anybody for anything. It's up to you. You're responsible for your actions. You make the choices. Don't put it on anybody outside of you or on your genes or on your family or on your parents, your upbringing. No, you take responsibility for upgrading your software and you don't blame anybody else. And it's your responsibility to upgrade your software toward the flow. Ultimately, you want to move your software from the impersonal levels, which would be like ally, enemy, and predator, prey, to the interpersonal levels, which would be like insider, outsider, superior, inferior. And those levels, people pass through these levels and they can serve as protective enclosures and their concessions, but eventually you build up to cooperation. But cooperation is, according to my grandpa, is still interpersonal, and it's still based off the illusion that there's a self and others that you cooperate with. And then eventually you get to mutual participation, where now you're in mutual participation in projects, which now you're even going beyond yourself. So this is moving toward the flow. So that's mutual participation in projects nationally first, and then mutual participation in projects globally, and then finally mutual participation in the flow, where at that point you are completely just in the zone. And because everything else is shaped by the ego, but ultimately you want to get to the level where you're just completely in the flow, and it's not even you who's acting, it's some higher power and you're just moving through that would be the highest level. So that's kind of what my grandpa would eventually teach me. But again, I didn't really start to understand that until like 2019, 2020, even later than that. And my grandpa didn't do a good job of teaching me. All the stuff I'm saying now was based off of learning a lot from him, and he didn't do a good job teaching me. And I had to really dissect what he was saying, and most of the time he would stop teaching me for a long time because we would get in arguments, especially about my mom and dad, and he would not teach me for years. And I'll get to that later. But at this point in college, he's teaching me, and he's telling me how, about this. I didn't understand this was existentialism, but how you can't change other people. All you can do is change yourself and upgrade your software and just try to be in the flow, and you have to take responsibility. But again, when I'm hearing him say this stuff, I'm thinking, again, white supremacist a little bit, because it's like, as I said, he would say, like, you don't want to blame anybody. So and he would say, like, there is no innocent victims. And I thought, oh, typical white supremacist type of thing, like blame the victim. So it's like, he would say, like, yeah, basically there's no innocent victims, and a lot of times it's your software. You invite what happens to your experience. And when I would hear that, I would think of like the slaves, and I would think, well, so are you blaming the slaves for slavery? And I would think like, and in a way he kind of is, and this is where it gets complex, and I'm not going to deny what he's saying. There might be some. Now my grandpa would say, if you're in the flow, you'll be able to discern the truth. Sometimes maybe the people do not deserve slavery. But my grandpa would say, if you're in the flow, and he would later talk about Sojourner Truth, he said that she was in the flow. And Sojourner Truth means seeker of truth. So she was seeking the truth, and she was therefore in transpersonal consciousness. She was not in interpersonal, self-absorbed consciousness, but she was in inquiry. So she was in a higher level of consciousness, which is transpersonal, not interpersonal or impersonal. And he said that therefore she was just able to walk away from slavery, and slavery could not hold her. But in a sense, what my grandpa was saying is, what I thought was, he was saying like, yeah, there is no innocent victims, and you have to take responsibility for everything. And my grandpa goes so far as to say, even like, you have to look at your past lives and see like, but he would say it's never the person's fault, it's their software's fault. But it's, there's software that gets people in trouble. But he said that people can upgrade their software. So he would say, he never blames the person. But ironically, like, I would feel like he would blame me, because he'd be like, well, you just had a lower level of software. That's why this stuff happened to you. But anyways, so I would hear him talk about this stuff, like, take responsibility and stuff. And I would think I would think of him as a victim blamer. And I looked at myself as a victim, because I thought about the shoot away machine, and I thought about, and I didn't tell him this yet. I didn't start talking about this until after college, and I'll get to that. But I would think about myself as a victim. And I thought like, well, how am I to blame him for the shoot away machine stuff that happened? And really, it wasn't my fault. It was my mom and dad's. It was dad's fault for getting the shoot away machine. And, it could be more complex than that. But I thought like, yeah, he's blaming the victim. He wants me to take responsibility. But how's that going to help? And I thought that he would cast pearls of swine. And my mom and dad misinterpreted that. And I'm going to get to that later. So for instance, after college, when I did try to tell my mom, what happened was my mom and dad made me live in Kauai, and my dad wouldn't speak to me, and my mom wouldn't see me, and they were saying like, you stay on this island, you're a schizophrenic loser, we hate you, you stay here and do not come back. And I tried to tell my mom like, listen, I understand you're still mad about the past, you're still mad about high school and stuff, but it wasn't my fault. It was a shoot away machine that messed things up. And then my mom would say, you need to take responsibility. Wow, you just blame everybody but yourself. Take responsibility. And she would, basically be repeating what she heard from my grandpa and what my grandpa would say. And because she parroted what my grandpa would be teaching. But again, my grandpa would even say that my mom is judgmental, and that she's expressing judgmental consciousness, predator prey consciousness. And he would say she's not in the flow. And the way that she's acting in that way, it's putting me down, and she's not discerning, but it's very predatory and very hurtful. And so he would acknowledge that people can misuse his teachings. But, I'm not going to deny, maybe I did have some sort of past life problem, and I had a lower level of software, and I'll get to that, because I was anti-white and stuff. Maybe I did have kind of a predator-prey software and stuff, and maybe there was more to what happened to me. But at the same time, I don't want to necessarily blame myself either. But regardless, this gets complicated, but I would look at my grandpa's teachings, and I would think, this is white supremacy teachings. Like, blame the victim. The victim a lot of times is to blame due to his lower levels of software. So I would think, okay, so you're saying that the slaves, the black people who were slaves, and I also think the Jews, because again, why was I this way? Why did I adopt more of the leftist liberal stance? Because I saw myself as Jewish, and I would think to myself, yeah, I would think about how the white people would blame the Jews for the Holocaust. And they would say like, yeah, it's because they were, the Rothschilds, and they were, hurting the white people, and they were, the bankers and stuff. And they would blame the victim. And I hated that. And I hated, the white, quote unquote, white people who would blame the black people, saying, oh, well, of course they were basically enslaved. Look at how they act. They're like animals, or savages, or primitive. And I hated that, right? But it's because my ego, though, too, was very much involved with it, because I saw myself as more of a black person. I saw myself as a Jewish person. So I took on the side of the colored people, and I was against the white people. I was anti-white. And now I think that it is important to adopt a more nuanced position and try to let my ego to the side and try to see things more objectively as opposed to emotionally. And I will admit, because I look at myself and I was like, dude, I was anti-white, and the white supremacists say that about Jewish people. And I look, and I understand that sometimes it is true. I know it is true. Sometimes my grandpa's right. Sometimes the victim is partially to blame for stuff. But not always. Again, if you're in the flow, you can really discern the nuances and the variables and the complexities involved with the situations. But at that time, I wasn't so aware of all that. But when I would hear my grandpa speak, I would think his teachings are a little bit white supremacist, and they seemed a little bit religious, and I didn't like religion, a little spiritual and religious. Like my grandpa's spiritual and religious, and I didn't like spirituality and religion because I thought they were more white supremacist, and they were used to maintain the status quo, like kind of like Freud. Like I was a big Freudian, I was a big communist. I was anti-religion. Freud was not for religion, and Freud would say that religion is just to maintain homeostasis, and that's why the way I saw religion and spirituality, just the way to maintain homeostasis. Now, again, there were things that my grandpa would teach me, like my grandpa would say that a part of Christianity is insider-outsider. Not always, but like it could be insider-outsider, which is a form of self-confirmatory behavior because you say like, I'm the insider, and then you get a sense of superiority and emotional superiority, and that's confirming the self. But at the same time, my grandpa would say, like for instance, with like Orthodox Jews later, at the time I didn't know anything about Orthodox Jews, I'll get to that. But, he would say like, well, sometimes concession or sometimes it, not compromising is important. So sometimes it would be important to, create an insider group that doesn't allow for promiscuity or has certain rituals and stuff like that. And not compromising and not going against that could be beneficial. But so you can have kind of an outsider orientation without the attitude component of it, which is more self-confirmatory. Things are complicated. And if you do that, that can help you transcend the self because now you're not involved in promiscuity. So now you can focus more on inquiry and, so on and so forth. And things are complex. But at the time I liked when my grandpa would say that, about Christianity. And I like that because I'd be like, yeah, Christians are insider-outsider oriented. And I was against Christians because I didn't like Christianity because I thought it was white supremacist. So I really, when I look at it, I had kind of a predator-prey orientation toward white people, and I wanted white people to mix. So I wanted to dissolve Christianity to make the white people mix. And I think that that's what the white supremacists say a lot about, what a lot of Jews do. Like there's arguments that Freud did that. Freud was against Christianity because he kind of wanted the Semites to defeat the white people, and he wanted the white people to mix. There's theories about that, and by legitimate scholars who think that that's the case, So there could be truth to what they're saying. So I want to look at all the perspectives, and I do think that there is truth to that that's the way, that was my orientation. It was a little anti-white, and I had kind of predator-prey orientation toward white people. So I was very much against right-wingers because I saw right-wingers as just basically white supremacists. Just Fox News I thought was white supremacists. So like I didn't like people who are all into family values. I was like one of those kind of like communist type of people who would be like, yeah, it'd be best if maybe the family dissolves and we just have like, communes and stuff because, it just leads to nepotism and it leads to stratification and, but at the same time, like I remember I would think that maybe perhaps the best thing would be to have a caste system like the Hindus have, but based around the personality types, where like you have INTP caste and the INTJ caste and the ESTP caste and the 4 castes of the guardians, the idealists. And when I look at it, I was like, yeah, that would make an ideal society. But a part of the reason why I wanted that was because I wanted to be like, yeah, so we don't discriminate based off of race, but we will discriminate based off of personality type. And that would create a more harmonious society. But then when I look at it, though, a big aspect of why I wanted that was because I thought to myself, yeah, if we did that, it would be anti-nationalist. Everybody would get together under this 4-class society, and we would all race mix. And I thought that would be ideal, to race mix. But a part of that, I think, was because I identified as Jewish, and I saw white people as bad, and I wanted the white people to mix. So I had kind of, again, a predatory stance toward white people. So I'm really examining my psyche and my consciousness and why I had those beliefs. Looking back at it now, I can kind of discern that. But at that time, yeah, I was that way. But when it's like a fish, when it's in the water, doesn't recognize it's in water. Like I had this orientation, but I was so absorbed in it, I wasn't able to step back and see it, to really examine my ego and see how it was guiding my actions and my thoughts. It's kind of crazy because I was aware of that concept, but I wasn't aware how strong it was for me. It's pretty interesting, but basically, yeah, but I was kind of suspicious of my grandpa because I thought this guy's kind of a white supremacist. He's kind of religious, kind of against promiscuity, kind of seems right-wing a lot. And that was my impression of him at that time. Like, I'll just give one more example of that was I remember I went to visit him in Kauai, and he gave a lecture. And during the lecture, he said how there was a lot of women at the lecture, and he said how women tend to more often be go to church, and he said because women tend to be more relationship oriented. And I remember after the lecture, I was like, Grandpa, don't make generalities about women. I said, there's individuals in every group. And my grandpa was like, I'm sorry. And then he started to become more liberal in that aspect too. Like, yeah, don't make generalities about people. And I don't know if it was because of me or if he was always a little bit more that way, but I think he was always maybe a little bit, but I really enforced that and entrenched that in him because I was like, yeah, don't make generalities. But why was I so into that? And I think a part of it was because I thought, yeah, don't make generalities about women because it'll also be making generalities about black people. And as a Jew, I was very much on the side of minorities and kind of against the white people. And I was like, yeah, and race is a social construction. So there's some black people who are very smart. I listened to a teaching company course where the professor was talking about that. She was like, yes, there's white people with very high IQs. Yes, that's true. But there's also black people with very high IQs. So to discriminate is irrational. And yes, there might be a bell curve where there's a lot more white people with very high IQs, but still, in the bell curve, there's some black people, and and there's some white people with very low IQ. So you want to look at people as individuals, and I really like that idea because again, I think that I had a proclivity and a propensity to want race mixing, and I think because I saw myself as more Jewish, and I saw white people as a threat. And so I was very into that. So I was like, Grandpa, don't make generalities about women. But in my mind, I'm like, yeah, and also we're extrapolate that to black people. And yes, black people, they can be doctors as much as white people. And even white people can be basketball players as much as black people. It's just about environment. The black people grow up in the ghetto, so they become basketball players. And the white people, they have more social capital and cultural capital. And so I was very much of a liberal leftist and a communist. And I had that kind of a desire for race mixing. And now I'm not going to deny there's some truth, there's validity to what I'm saying. Yes, there's individuals in every group, but also we don't want to deny that there is also differences between races. And the idea that it's a social construction is not completely valid either. And I guess if you're in the flow, you'll be able to discern the nuances to all that. But, I don't think I was completely in the flow because I think that I was more attached to my ego orientation, seeing myself as Jewish, and that guided me more toward the liberal leftist orientation. And I'm going to get more to that later.